Hello again, honeys, from my brand new apartment. I'm very excited to be with my new roommates, Nina and Jade, as well as my four-legged roommates, Rue and Winnie. It is, as always, an adjustment, a work in progress, but it is nice to have friendly faces to be around. And I don't have much administrative news for you all this week, besides just encouraging you to check out our 5-minute musical, our new series, monthly series that began with our June episode featuring Beyonce's Hold Up music video. So let's go ahead and begin with your buzz for the week. First things first, our follow-ups. That condom that the Rijksmuseum put on view featuring an erotic nun etching has drawn backlash from a Christian group. Surprise, surprise. The nearly 200-year-old condom made from sheep intestine on view as part of a small exhibition on 19th century sex work has prompted outrage from a conservative Christian group in the Netherlands. A recap of the background here. The artifact is printed with the image of a nun opening her legs to 3 priests in a parody of the Judgment of Paris myth. It was likely a brothel souvenir and is believed to be one of only 2 known surviving examples of this type of object. And so that group protested. 11 demonstrators outside the museum last week, and a circulation of 5,000 flyers was organized by the Stichting Civitas Christiana and its youth wing, TFP Student Action Europe. The group claims that the condom was originally created as anti-Catholic propaganda during the French Revolution, and according to our newspaper, they called the display a, quote, grotesque insult to God, the Catholic Church, and the entire Dutch nation, end quote. Co-curator of the exhibition, Joyce Zellen, reportedly sees things differently, saying, quote, mocking religion is as old as religion itself. It's meant to be funny, end quote. And June 28th saw that new European Union law aimed at antiquities trafficking go into effect. Regulation 2019/880 is aimed at preventing the sale of looted antiquities and went into effect Saturday. It was designed 6 years ago in response specifically to the looting of cultural heritage and archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq. Art News writes that though it has a partial exemption for temporary exhibitions, the law may still dissuade private collectors and/or abroad institutions from loaning works to those in the European Union. They report, quote, implementation of the new law will depend on the actions of individual EU member states, but non-compliance with Regulation 2019/880 could result in seizures and other legal consequences for art dealers, collectors, and other art professionals, end quote. They went on to cite Ike Schmidt, the director of the Museo e Real Bosco de Capodimonte in Naples, who said there is a, quote, complete lack of administrative infrastructure, end quote, for the proper implementation of this regulation, and that, quote, thousands of administrative officials, archaeologists, art historians, and restorers would need to be hired to cope with the avalanche of requests, end quote. What was interesting to me about our source articles for this is that many of them focused on the money side of this. What seizures would be covered by insurance, if any, and will it be harder for collectors to sell their works? But I find I'm more concerned with once they're confiscated, then what? Who gets these objects and who decides who gets them? I wasn't able to find answers to these questions. We also learned about a new project that will map the fire-ravaged Altadena's cultural heritage. The Getty Foundation in Los Angeles has committed $420,000 to document the loss of culturally significant sites in the wake of the devastating Eaton fire that ravaged nearly 7,000 structures in and around the city and take stock of its quote-unquote intangible heritage as developers rush in to gobble up the charred lots in multiples. As predicted, locals fear displacement and the loss of the region's character and have adopted the phrase, quote, Altadena is not for sale, end quote. This effort seems to validate these concerns as well as the fact the area is special. The Los Angeles Conservancy, the nonprofit which advocates for the preservation of the city's cultural and architectural resources, will lead the Getty-funded documentation project over a period of 18 months, says Getty Foundation Director Joan Weinstein. The efforts will, quote, build on traditional conservation methods, which typically rely heavily on technical mapping, by emphasizing community engagement and including intangible heritage, end quote. The project aims to incorporate this, quote unquote, cultural asset mapping into policy decisions regarding fire relief to identify which histories will be documented and which heritage assets are most at risk, and to collect oral histories and physical information on sites, artists, communities, etc. as appropriate. This should be seen as a win, honeys, because because of Altadena's unique history and demographics. It has been home to transformational writers and artists like science fiction author Octavia Butler and the first Black person to win an Oscar for Best Actor, Sidney Poitier. When the fires began, the homeowner rate of Black residents in Altadena was about twice as high as the national average at 81%. As Weinstein points out, quote, "The challenge lies in how you preserve as much of Altadena's really unique cultural fabric and historic built environment as possible as the community moves towards rebuilding," end quote. So we will see exactly how they choose to handle this in this project. Last week's headlines featured some eye-catching sales. For one, billionaire art collector Ken Griffin bought Lincoln's handwritten copy of the 13th Amendment for $13.7 million. Griffin is the founder of the hedge fund Citadel and a major arts philanthropist. The document in question was only one of 4 copies still in private hands and was offered during the first part of Sotheby's Fine Books and Manuscripts, including Americana sale last Thursday. It had an estimate of $8 to $12 million US. Griffin also acquired from the same sale a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation signed in 1864, which he bought for $4.4 million on a $3 to $5 million estimate. So the why we care here, it is a handwritten old-ass presidential document, and he apparently likes these. He spent $43.2 million US on a rare copy of the US Constitution, one of 14 printed for delegates to the Constitutional Convention back in 2021. He's lending that one to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia for public view through 2026. And apparently he wanted this pair for patriotic reasons as well. Quote, "As America approaches its 250th anniversary, we all have a part to play to strengthen and renew the promise of our nation. Each generation must experience the sacred documents of our democracy, to learn from them and be inspired to carry our country forward. I hope to inspire all Americans to uphold the vision set forth in our Constitution and the 13th Amendment," end quote. And like we said, the total with all fees came to $13.7 million US, more than triple the $2.4 million record set for a different copy of the amendment back in 2016. We also learned that France's most famous antique dealer sold his Napoleon collection at Sotheby's in Paris for $9.6 million US. In doing so, it beat out the €6 million or $6.9 million US dollar estimate from the sale of what Sotheby's called, quote, "one of the most significant offerings of Napoleonic material ever to come to market," end quote. According to its statements, the collection featured 112 lots of imperial furniture, old master paintings, and, quote, "deeply personal relics that reflect the inner world of Napoleon Bonaparte," end quote, such as a copy of the French emperor's marriage certificate to his first wife, Josephine. All these objects came from the private collection of prominent French antiques collector Pierre-Jean Chancellon. Our sources say he is reportedly being forced to sell the collection pieces formerly housed in his Parisian mansion in order to pay off a €10 million or $11.6 US million loan. Despite his denial of any financial stress, Le Figaro reported that an unannounced 6-person group carrying folders with Ministry of Public Finance letterhead took notes on the prices of the lots and, quote, "visibly requested the seizure of the proceeds," end quote. What really caught our attention was some of the objects and the price points that were impressive or notable. One portrait by Jean-Baptiste Malzès, a French painter known for his battle scenes, sold for $1 million, aka 20 times its estimate. There was also a sort of weird element to this sale. Chancellon told the New York Post before it that he hoped Tesla billionaire Elon Musk, quote, "the new Napoleon would buy everything to keep my babies together," end quote. We do not know if Musk actually bid on anything. Also announced last week, the Vancouver Art Gallery will lay off 30 unionized employees. The art newspaper was the first to announce that approximately 20% of the VAG's 150 unionized staff members will be laid off, though it was unclear as of June 27th how many non-union staff would also be laid off. We have heard statements from both sides thus far. A spokesperson for the gallery described the staff reductions as part of, quote, "the difficult but necessary process of reducing its operating budget to ensure long-term sustainability," end quote. President Warren Williams of the local branch of the Canadian Union of Public Employees representing workers from the museum said he was, quote, "deeply saddened by the employer's recent decision," end quote, and confirmed that the union has, quote, "made the difficult decision to permit the employer to present voluntary severance package offers to individual employees," end quote, in a memo to VAG staff published on June 23rd. We should note, honeys, that financial woes are a real thing for the VAG. The art newspaper reported that the mass layoffs, quote, "have raised doubts about the timeline for the new building project, which is already a decade and a half in the planning," end quote, and has racked up 60 million Canadian dollars in plan-changing costs. This announcement also came shortly after the city of Vancouver, one of the gallery's main funders, announced its own budget cuts and hiring freezes across multiple sectors. After art workers for Palestine Scotland organized a sit-in in the Glasgow Centre for Contemporary Arts' courtyard on Tuesday afternoon, the institution remained closed for the rest of the week. According to our sources, the protest was intended to last the entirety of the week and called for the CCA to support the Palestinian campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel after its board had not done so in early June. Law enforcement was called in to help museum security staff disperse the sit-in, but from there, the statements differ, with the art workers for Palestine Scotland claiming that the police and security teams were unnecessarily forceful and violent. The CCA board's statement called it a, quote, rapidly evolving situation involving an intended occupation of our courtyard space, end quote, and wrote, quote, law enforcement was called in response to a forced entry and the building was secured, end quote. The CCA's official public closure notice said this decision was not done lightly, but that a pause was needed to prioritize safety and the well-being of staff as well as visitors and, quote, create space for reflection, end quote. We additionally heard about a new video game that allows you to repatriate African artifacts by looting Western museums. The Johannesburg-based gaming company Nyamokop unveiled its latest project, Relooted, earlier this month at the annual Summer Game Fest in Los Angeles. This is, according to our sources, a side-scrolling puzzle platformer a la early Tomb Raider or Prince of Persia games, where players join a crew of Robin Hood-esque thieves staging these elaborate heists in the near future. The goal is essentially to take back stolen artifacts hidden away in guarded private collections of Western museums, and of course, get away with this successfully. Possibly the most exciting part about this game is that even though the specific museums in it are fake, quote, all of the artifacts in Relooted are based on real-world pieces in Western museums. In crafting the various missions, the developer team spent 2 years of research narrowing down the list of pieces of the hundreds still held by Western museums into something manageable, end quote, and specifically looked among them for culturally significant artifacts to render as accurately as possible using available photos or scans. Of course, that's one of the reasons this is such a fascinating headline to us, is that it's true to life in so many ways, but also because of the company itself. Nyamokop is, according to its own website, quote, one of the largest independent game developers in sub-Saharan Africa, and quote, with developers from nations across the continent. Their first release was called Semblance in 2018, which became the first African-developed original IP to release on a Nintendo game console ever. And said creative director of the game, Ben Myers, quote, there are not a lot of opportunities for people here to professionally make video games. So if you're offering people here that opportunity, and it so happens that it's an African-inspired thing, which you don't get to see a lot of in games, people are pretty excited about doing that, end quote. I myself am looking into how exactly to get my hands on a copy, and I will possibly drop a review if I do. Another headline from the week, a Banksy mural has become caught up in a legal battle between a working man's club and one of its ex-employees. The Financial Times reports that 3 trustees of the Bethnal Green Working Man's Club in East London, upon which the mural was painted, have claimed that the work was illegally removed and put up for sale in the U.S. in this lawsuit filed against ex-employee Warren Dent as well as other defendants. The work in question is titled Yellow Lines Flower Painter from 2007. It portrays a workman in his overalls holding a paint roller and sitting on a paint can next to a giant flower apparently emerging from the street's double yellow lines. The painting is currently located in Colorado. The club's former accountant says that the club's secretary, Stephen Smorthit, agreed to sell Dent the work for £20,000 or $27,000 back in 2019. He then commissioned the art restorer, Chris Bull, owner of Fine Art Restoration Company, also a defendant in the case, to remove the mural, but the suit argues that they did not give Dent permission to buy the work, therefore the painting was unlawfully removed, unlawfully put up for sale in the U.S. TLDR, the trio of trustees is suing for the return of the work on the basis that Dent has no right to sell it because he doesn't even own it. Banksy's office, known as Pest Control, along with the 3 trustees, Dent and Capital and Company, all declined to comment, but Bull himself and Fine Art Restoration Company have confirmed that they will contest these claims. In other news, the Vatican has unveiled the last of 4 restored Raphael rooms after a 10-year cleaning project. Located in the Apostolic Palace, the 4th frescoed reception room was painted by the famed Renaissance painter and architect and his students in the 1500s and finally had its scaffolding removed June 26th of this year. The process reportedly uncovered a, quote, novel mural painting technique, end quote, through the application of oil paint directly to the wall and a grid of nails embedded in the walls, according to our sources. Fabio Piacentini, one of the chief restorers News explains, quote, "From a historical and critical point of view, and also technical, it was truly a discovery. The technique used and planned by Raphael was truly experimental for the time and has never been found in any other mural made with oil paint," end quote. We also heard about a British team that uncovered a lost Nile Delta city. The discovery of the remains of Emet, a once prominent city in Egypt's Nile Delta and buried for centuries beneath a mound in the Sharqiya Governorate, was announced this week by Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Archaeologists led by a British team from the University of Manchester uncovered multi-story homes, storage areas, and animal enclosures which provide, quote, "an unusually intact glimpse of life from the early to mid-4th century BCE," end quote. We wanted to share this headline because the rare finds were made via satellite scans, which found proof of the survival of thick foundation walls for pharaonic urban planning below the surface. This is remarkable for the region where mud brick rarely endures this long. And the site itself has a loaded history. It was once the capital of the 19th province of Lower Egypt. We also learned that Ai Weiwei will stage a new work about war and peace in Ukraine. The site-specific work, titled "Three Perfectly Proportioned Spheres and Camouflage Uniforms Painted White," is commissioned by Ribbon International, a nonprofit focused on supporting contemporary and historic Ukrainian art and culture. It will be on view at Pavilion 13, a Soviet-era exhibition space in Kiev, from September 14th through November 30th. The artist himself said, quote, "My artworks are not merely an aesthetic expression, but also a reflection of my position as an individual navigating immense political shifts, international hegemonies, and conflicts. This exhibition provides a platform to articulate these concerns. At its core, this exhibition is a dialogue about war and peace, rationality, and irrationality," end quote. We also heard that Anna Wintour will remain the Met Gala chair. Although news of her resignation as editor-in-chief of U.S. Vogue after nearly 40 years raised questions about her longtime tenure as chair of the annual museum benefit, a June 26th announcement by the magazine confirmed that the fashion media executive will continue in her roles as global editorial director for Vogue, chief content officer for Condé Nast, and the gala chair. Wintour has made numerous changes to the benefit over the years, from its scheduling being the first Monday of May to its notoriously exclusive invitation-only guest list, but she's also faced controversy during her time as the co-chair. For example, various calls to boycott the event in this year or the other, and the protest by hundreds of pro-Palestine individuals marching just outside the event in 2024. In a more curious story, we heard that the city of Ostend in Belgium has halted construction of a set of sculptures by British Guyanese artist Hugh Locke, which would have recontextualized a public monument to Belgian King Leopold II. Locke beat out 10 other shortlisted competitors to win the commission in 2023. He planned for 5 golden sculptures referencing colonial history to be placed on posts in front of and below the statue, appearing in the sightlines of those looking at the current monument from the front, and would have lasted 10 years. The objects include an elephant's head to reference the ivory trade, a severed clenched fist to reference the Belgian colonialist practice of chopping off the hands of workers who failed to collect their quota of rubber, and the disembodied head of Leopold himself. But the newly elected city council announced the project was being scrapped due to a lack of proper public consultation prior to the award of the commission. They confirmed that alternative proposals would instead be considered. While there might be relatively benign reasons for this cancellation, for example, the chopped off body parts, those could be rough to have on view in a place where a lot of kids are, or whatever, it's just as possible that there are more nefarious reasons like censorship, like hiding colonial histories. Hopefully, further reporting will give us insight into what exactly that reasoning is. We do have 2 obituaries to cover this week. The first is for Rosalind Fox Solomon, who passed early Monday morning, June 23rd, at the age of 95. The news was announced by Stephen Bulger Gallery, which has exhibited her work since 2007. Hyperallergic writes, quote, "Throughout a nearly 6-decade practice that began in mid-adulthood and extended until her final years, Fox Solomon used black and white photography to center the lived experiences of individuals whose stories were often sidelined or entirely excluded from the mainstream," end quote. Our second is for Arnaldo Pomodoro, who passed away at age 98 on June 22nd, though a specific cause was not given. Hyperallergics Anthony Majanlati writes, quote, "I remember the constant activity of Arnaldo himself, always curious, always carving away at a shiny surface to reveal the dark and incomprehensible mechanisms within," end quote. Another headline of note, bricks from a historic Atlantic City church are getting a second life at the Smithsonian Castle. The First Presbyterian Church's rare sandstone bricks will be transported from its demolition site in New Jersey to Washington, D.C., where where they'll be used to restore the 170-year-old National Mall building. The Smithsonian Castle, built in 1855, is undergoing its first major renovation in more than 50 years. But because the Maryland quarry that its current dark red Seneca sandstone facade was sourced from shut down in 1901, the designers needed to find a new source. Once getting hold of a sample, they found that the church's sandstone was a near-perfect match because the two came from the same geologic formation. The church was significantly damaged when Hurricane Sandy swept through in 2012 and eventually condemned. Carly Bond, Associate Director of Architectural History and Historic Preservation for the Smithsonian, says, quote, "The castle restoration project will preserve it for the next 100 years. The building is the symbolic heart of the institution," end quote. The Smithsonian purchased all the bricks from the First Presbyterian Church, and its leaders plan to save some for future use. And that, honeys, is our show for the day. Hope you've enjoyed. Hope you found some interesting buzz here. Remember to check out our new content, new episodes as they drop throughout the month, and let us know what you think about the 5-minute musical. Until next time, hydrate or dihydrate, take care. We'll be talking soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.